Hi, I'm Carrie Lee Merritt, and welcome back to Merrittocracy. I'm here today with my friend and neighbor, Guy Emerson Mount, who's a professor of history at Auburn University. Now, we've talked about several topics, but one thing I brought up several times on Merrittocracy, I got my start writing for AAIHS, Black Perspectives. You have been involved with them for several years now. I can't tell people enough what that organization did for me as a writer, as a historian. They taught me how to write for the general public, how to use, very specific skill set that was handed to me through my PhD and actually make it accessible to the American people. Yeah. And so I totally believe in the organization. What has it meant to you?
Oh, it's magic. I mean, that organization is just going to go down as one of the most amazing, magical organizations that I think that I've ever seen in academia. I don't study that particularly, but the level of just care and support and just love that germinates out of that organization, it's absolutely remarkable. The support that people have for one another, the wider mission of helping people, and particularly scholars of color, right, navigate through this system of academia that is not really built for people of color at all. It's not built for first-generation students. It's not. It can be a very hostile, very harmful place in a lot of ways. And this is just, Black Perspectives is an oasis. It's a community. Of course there's amazing writing. Of course there's amazing work, and I don't want to undermine any of that, right? I mean, that's there and obvious, but the reason that that is able to exist and the freedom that people have in order to be able to do that and know they're going to have a group of people that are going to support that work and that are going to engage with that work, critically sometimes even, but always critically in a way that you know that everyone is part of a wider mission of making Black history, Black intellectual history, radical thought, all of that, putting all that to the forefront of the conversation in academia, where you've had, frankly, massive regression from the 1960s, right, where you have this, the tenured radical that has kind of, in some cases, stayed on fighting. I was just with Barbara Ransby and Kathy Cohen the other day. They've stuck with the fight, but then you've got a whole generation that just kind of, filtered away and didn't keep fighting those fights within academia itself. And what Black Perspectives is doing is giving voice to the next generation of scholars. We're heavily focused on, early career scholars, and it was started by Chris Cameron when he was still, pre-tenure. He was, I think, at UNC Charlotte and was in his first couple years and said, we really kind of need this. And then Keisha Blaine, she's tenured now, but when she kind of took over for Chris Cameron, she was also in that early career path. Now J.T. Rowan is just coming out with his first book, and so the model here, as opposed to other professional organizations that a lot of them have a real old guard, a lot of them kind of are really hierarchical in terms of their structure. They don't, people grab power, as it were, in these organizations, just kind of hold on to it. The idea here is a constant kind of cycling through of young career professionals that are helping kind of, lift as we rise kind of thing. And as we get into kind of positions within academia, we're able to help guide, junior scholars, grad students. I started as a grad student, for example, right, writing for the blog and wrote some pieces, and then have, moved on to continue to write as a professor, and then now as an associate editor. It's been just great to be able to do amazing things that other parts of the academy are not doing, and we're revamping, I think, the journal article. I mean, for many of us, these are our journal articles. They're peer-reviewed now. They're 1,500 words. They're being taught all over the nation, all over the world. Some of my pieces have been translated into, like, I think Serbian or something like that, and they're using, this to think about racial capitalism in Serbia. You don't get that in too many academic journals. You write something, a couple hundred people might read it at best, and it's gone. Whereas with us, I mean, there's tens and hundreds of, we're up to millions and millions of unique views per year. People sharing on Facebook, on Twitter. We're reaching a wider audience. It's a revolution in the way that academics interface with the general public. And
Absolutely.
so I'm working on, a podcast now that will take that kind of even further. And we're working on little like explainer videos, kind of YouTube channel that will do a similar kind of thing for people that might not want to read blog posts but want the good ideas and want to have kind of their horizons expanded. That's the plan.
It is such a source of comfort, as you said, for graduate students who are primarily at white institutions and can feel oftentimes left out or having to deal with, all of the things we know that come with being a person of color and specifically a Black person in the Academy. I know that it has been such a psychological resource, just a wonderful, loving community. I hear that from everyone. And the conferences are absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Only thing close is Asala, right? And Asala kind of trends a little older. It's kind of that first guard. The Carter G. Woodson did a similar project. I mean, I see what we're doing as continuing that legacy. And I was talking to someone the other day that said, since Black Perspectives kind of came online, Asala has been kind of revitalized in a lot of ways. You see more young people at Asala now because we've done this thing at Black Perspectives, and people want more of it, right? And so I'm hoping that the older traditional organizations, right, will take some cues, and that as some of us kind of age out, as it were, of Black Perspectives, that we're able to kind of move over to older organizations and bring some of that same spirit and hopefully structurally kind of transform those organizations so they're more horizontal. The early days of Black Perspectives were so unbelievable, where we were just all like, everybody was basically an editor, everybody had full access to everything. Someone would post something online and someone else would catch a typo. Oh, I caught a typo, don't worry, I already changed it for you. We would do, now we have professional copy editors and all of that make sure nothing goes out that's bad. But that idea that everyone within the organization kind of starts from, I think that's really important to have a horizontal structure. It's something that academic departments should be, even though many of them have kind of trended hierarchical in the same way the university writ large has trended hierarchical and forgotten these kind of horizontal methods of decision making. But that kind of governing by consensus as opposed to kind of fighting things out, I think is one of the models that I'm hoping that Black Perspectives will be able to infuse into other parts of the Academy.
Well, and as you say, whenever I tell an organization in academe how to restructure and make it more applicable to younger people, to millennials, I use AAIHS Black Perspectives as the model to go to. Go look at their website, go look at how they're structuring the articles. Like you said, our academic models are not translating. People are not going to read them who are outside of academe. And so we have to either change the way we're getting information to people, or they're not going to get it.
Right.
They're going to get it from sources that aren't real. They're going to get it from people that aren't informed. And so it is incumbent on us to change it. And I'm so grateful that they have. And like you said, it's all over the world now. Those articles go everywhere. Kind of tied into that, I know you're still very, very involved in really starting organizing here in Atlanta and getting involved in Southern politics now to some extent. Where do you see the future of reparations going down here in the South at a more local, state level? Do you think we can use organizations like Black Perspectives in order to educate people in the South who have largely been uneducated about these issues? I mean, I grew up here. I grew up in Georgia at a public school where I learned from racist textbooks. I learned from Dunning era racist textbooks. And we've got to have that conversation that a lot of whites, even if they're well-meaning, we don't know this history. We weren't taught this history.
It reminds me of something Ta-Nehisi Coates said last night on the event I was with him. We're not in a fight over facts anymore. We're in a fight over myths. We can't approach this as if good facts and good argumentation is going to matter in this fight that you're talking about, right, in terms of education. You have to directly confront the myths. You have to deconstruct the mythology, and the mythology is thick. And it's thick down here, and you can feel it down here. And it's in people's churches, it's in people's just daily interactions. And that education part is my daughter's AP US history thing. She texts me all of the things that are wrong with her AP US history textbook and the ways in which the lost cause and all of that are being perpetuated. We literally talked last night about the Dunning School. Yes, we're still talking about the Dunning School. And there's still people that don't know about the Dunning School, even academics that don't know that there's an intellectual genealogy to the false history that's being perpetuated in American high schools and elementary schools today that you have to confront that myth. You have to really break down that myth. And of course, it starts with DuBois, like most things do. He's the first one to really confront that Dunning School. I've written a piece on this called When Slaves Go on Strike. It's on Black Perspectives, and it talks about the rapid response to, the long response actually, DuBois' immediate response, but then the long response that scholarship took up after him in order to try to undo this Dunning School.
Right, you even went a little bit after Eric Foner, because of course he then pushes back, instead of starting Reconstruction in 1860, pushes it up to centering Lincoln in 1863.
Exactly, yeah, it's a problem. And all roads go back to DuBois. I tell my students this.
Absolutely.
They all go back to DuBois. It's kind of like Marx, right? If you want to do it, you got to go through Marx to get to everything else you want to talk about. You got to go through DuBois. There are other key seminal thinkers, but I think DuBois is, for African American history, yeah, you start there, you go through there, and Reconstruction is a period. I mean, as you know, right, you want to get to American history, that's also where you start. Right. You start in Reconstruction. You go backwards from Reconstruction, you go forwards from Reconstruction, but you start with slavery emancipation as that critical question in American history. You want to, everything before that is prelude, everything after that is kind of postscript.
But you think you've seen a turn back now in these past couple of years? A lot of the new scholarship that's coming out, the younger generation, they're going back to Du Bois, though, right?
Yeah, they are. And there's so much to mine there. I mean, I know academics that read Du Bois every single year and get something new every single time. And that the only other person that you can do that with is Marx. You have David Harvey, for example, that reads Marx and teaches Marx every single year, and every single year he gets something from it. You can read Black Reconstruction every single year, and I think it's John Key Moon that does this in his classes. He has every one of his students read it, and every year you get something new from it. There's imperialism, and there's so much just in Black Reconstruction that we haven't mined, that because it's so damn big. I mean, it's a monster, right? And my students are reading it, actually. They're reading it against E.P. Thompson's British History of the Working Class.
Wow,
right?
that's
fantastic. And so to think of these two kind of big important books. But to get back to the South, and to get back to kind of what's happening here, and one of the jokes I always make, comparing my experience at Auburn, let's say, to my experience working at the University of Chicago, is I've come down to Alabama where it's more progressive. And people are like, what are you talking about? It's more, well, my experience with the University of Chicago, right, who doesn't think it has any kind of real burden as it relates to race, which is crazy when you think about the fact that it was founded by a slaveholder. They financially supported restrictive covenants. Hundreds of thousands of dollars they spent, the university, to maintain segregation and keep Black people out of Hyde Park. And now with the presidential library, they're pushing Black people out into the major drivers of gentrification in Black communities. So the three main, they're wrong every single historical period, right? They've been dead wrong every single time, and they're still causing harm in Chicago. Auburn, now of course, it's also founded by slaveholders. All the buildings are built by slaveholders. The whole campus is a plantation, a former plantation, which, to get my head around that, the stadium, I mean, Black football players are playing on a stadium, on a literal field that used to be cotton, that someone probably died right there. Someone might be buried right there. We just don't know. That's heavy. That's a heavy history. But no one's delusional about the fact that that history is there. They may not want to talk about it, but everyone in the back of their mind, at least, is aware that it's there. And if you tell them about it, they're not going to deny it. Right. They're going to try to minimize it. They're going to try to, oh, it wasn't that bad. They'll do that. White America, right? Even Black America that doesn't, Black Southerners that kind of don't want to, broach the topic might do some, oh, we've moved on, or we got to look forward, or some of that conversation. Obviously, as a historian, I think past, present, and future in African American history are at the very least dialectic, but I think actually collapsible into one another. If you think about experiences that Black people have in the U.S., that past, present, and future are kind of all wrapped up into one in a way that they're not for white America, right? They can be compartmentalized, Western epistemological kind of renderings of knowledge and how we know what we know. Say past is one thing, present's one thing, future's another. I don't think that's true for most Black people, right? Is that the past is always present. It's always lingering. It's always there. And the future is always read. Possible futures are always read through the things that are happening in the past. That historical sense of memory and reality, I think confronting that epistemological divide, that gap, and letting white America know that there's nothing that's going on here, right? That Black people are not thinking about that past, right? I always tell people, I ask white Americans, how many times did slavery come up at your last Thanksgiving dinner? Little references, just little whatever. White Southerners, right? Doesn't, right? Black America, there's always going to be something, even if it's a little offhanded joke or it's a little, it always is there, right? It always still lingers. And so, yeah, I think that getting that starting point is crucial. But back to Auburn as progressive, right? They have they know, because that history is known, because Auburn is trying to revamp its image and doesn't want to be seen as a backward Southern institution, which it knows that people in University of Chicago look down on them. That, oh, Alabama, we would never, blah, we have no racism here, blah, blah, blah. Never mind King saying explicitly that Chicago was the most racist place he'd ever seen and most violent, get hit in the head with a brick in Cicero, all of that, right? Forget all that. Universities still look down on Auburn. Auburn knows that, and Auburn doesn't want to be seen that way. So it has broadening scholars like myself, broadening scholars like Austin McCoy. They knew very consciously we're going to be disruptive, and we're going to show up and not just kind of tote a party line. They want that that change to happen, and that's different than the University of Chicago, that is just denying there's any change that even needs to happen. Right. The burden of the South, as it were, that the Southern universities are trying to brush off their shoulders, as it were. I think that can actually be a big help to reparations in the South. It would not surprise me at all if major reparations movements would take off locally in the South in a way that they might not in the North. The only thing that worries me is the organizational infrastructure. I think about Jackson, for example. Jackson is kind of already doing it in a lot of ways, right? But a place like Jackson, where you have an active organizing tradition, where you have reparations in the DNA through the Queen Mother Moore and the Republic of New Africa and everyone that came to Jackson that are still there, it would not surprise me at all if Jackson is the hub of reparations, kind of local movements, at least in the United States, more so than in a place like Chicago that does have a very rich organizing tradition.
No, but I completely agree with you. I always tell that to people, that there's such a bastion of like real leftist progressivism in the Deep South, both from Black people and from white people, because I think when you think about social and economic issues, and you're driving through rural Mississippi, I mean, you see that it's a matter of life and death to people, in a way that outside of certain parts of ghettos and cities, or other parts of rural America, you don't see that type of just soul-crushing poverty. That something's got to change. Something great, something just fundamentally, like you're talking about, actual reparations. Something has to be repaired, because you can see plainly we can't keep going this way, and the South has an urgency about that.
And some of this is Noam Chomsky's old theory about kind of American liberalism, that there's an anarchist thread running right through the center of American liberalism that lands in places like the South, where people are, let's say, very into the local, very into not big state control, right? And we don't want a state kind of managing everything that's going on. And the only turn that has to kind of be made is we also don't want big capital dictating what happens here, right? But I think there's a certain cultural proclivity towards something like a radical anarchist socialist vision, like what they're doing in Jackson, that runs through a lot of rural Southern communities that people would, you can imagine things like, very easily autonomous, organized communities that are, sharing resources, right? And kind of maybe abolishing private property, or at least putting up certain kind of, community solar panels and things like that to try to create a smaller little utopian vision. Now again, there's huge issues with that. When you think about kind of where some of those starting points might come from, they could be very racist starting points. They could be very kind of isolated and resource poor kind of places. But that's where reparations, if it's to do anything, I think it needs to be able, on a national level. So if we're going to have reparations nationally, I think it needs to empower the local. I think it needs to be having huge block grants to local communities, Black communities, that are then able to say, look, how do we want to interface with our local state and our local, now that we have resources, do we want to engage with the federal government and the state government in the same way that we want to? Or, assuming there's enough resources, right, do we want to just have that sovereignty? Do we want to be able to just form an autonomous community where we don't have police policing us, will police us, thank you very much, right? We don't want the state, we don't want the police, we don't want big capital, we want to just survive right here, right? And I think some of those experimentations, which people have tried in different moments, right, I think none of them are going to be perfect. We don't know how to do that. That's going to be a huge learning curve and a learning process. But I think communities need to be, through a reparative national plan, especially in rural places, because we're going to be thinking about cities, we're going to be thinking about checks, we're going to be thinking about this existing system of capitalism. I think the rural Black South, back to that Republic of New Africa kind of vision and model, right? There's real possibility there that if the funding is sufficient, if the federal government can do enough block funding through reparations and take small rural communities and say, look, here's enough resources that you guys can figure some of this out, right? And you guys can make a solar plant factory. You have enough money to do this. Worker-owned cooperative on communal land, and they're
the
real,
Robin Kelly version.
Exactly. You know, it's hammer and hoe. It's back to all that. Those impulses are there. I just think the resources need to be there. I think the vision and the possibility that this could happen needs to be there. It's not hope. It's different than hope. We don't need hope right now. What we need are resources, right? We need our experimentations, and we need people willing to take control of their lives and put in the work to form an actual democratic society. Because we have nothing resembling a democracy. You vote. That's different than a democracy, right? I'm talking direct democracy on the ground, horizontal decision making that it doesn't even need voting, right? That's a thing too. You can vote and not have a democracy. You can have a democracy without voting. If everyone's sitting around the table with you, right, is in agreement, you have a democracy, right? You didn't have to vote on it because you all thought the same thing and said, do we all agree, or is everyone cool with this? Okay, let's go. That's democracy.
And that's, I mean, everything you're saying, I'm starting to see the future, and you're absolutely right. It's all got to come down to federal grants to the local governments, I think.
It's communities that can reformulate, city or a governance or a state looks like. You know, I think that's really what it is. We have to reimagine the state as much as we're reimagining, capital and capitalism and racial capitalism. We need to reimagine governance. We need to reimagine what it means to have a democracy, because it's not what we have now. I show a chart to my students. There's zero, statisticians, political scientists have done, there's zero correlation between what everyday people want right now and what happens on the federal level. And I suspect the local level is probably the same. I don't think the local level is any different, right? It might even be worse.
I was going to say, it's
because
probably
you've
worse.
got these big, corporate, the big local business guy who's the booster of the city or whatever, and the real estate mogul. That's the guys whose interests the state is representing. And so I think we need to stop that delusion of thinking that we're going to go to the polls, we're going to vote, and something is going to change. It's not. Right? It's the same thing. It might get a little tweak, right? As Barbara Ransby says, you might change the trajectory of your struggle or the background of your political struggle, but you're not going to get the kind of radical transformations that people actually want and need through putting all of your eggs in an electoral basket, right? By all means, vote, participate. I heard Ta-Nehisi say the other day, actually this was a while ago, he's like, it's like taking out the garbage. If you're going to go vote, in our current, broken system of anti-democratic corporate ownership and control of everything, take out the garbage by all means. Vote for the lesser of two evils. We want a world with less evil, sure, fine, but don't put so much energy into that you miss the fact that there's real democratic possibilities and there's real opportunities to form new systems with your community that if you're depending on some elected representative to do it for you, it's not going to happen. We need to be really active. Democracy is not a spectator sport, right? It's not a sport where you get to just pull a lever and say, oh, let's watch and see what happens, right? If anything, what the internet and everything else has done is it's at least created a vibrant kind of social space in which people seem to be at least willing to sound off on things. But now we need to move from sounding off to, hey, let's build some things, right? Let's build some local institutions. Let's build some local communities in ways that are different.
How do you see labor fitting into this? Do you see something like a localized version of a federal jobs guarantee paired with a universal basic income? I mean, if you're talking about actually putting this into, how do you conceptualize that part of it?
A UBI with local community control, right, could be an avenue, could be a way to kind of move things forward, which seems paradoxical in the sense that you're effectively giving people resources to be able to create some of their own state infrastructures. They're a new kind of models. Right, so the devil will be in the details of all of those things. Money is going to have to be sufficient enough to do that. But I think, if you had a UBI could work, and it could work to the extent that it allows people to have autonomy and the ability to use those resources to develop new, ongoing, sustainable systems that are outside of capitalism, that are environmentally friendly, that are all of that. The jobs guarantee, I think, is problematic. That's going to leave capital in charge. I mean, it might be a good short-term kind of fix, but what jobs, right? A guarantee of what kind of a job? Forget the pay, but the conditions and resources. This is back to David Graeber, right? This is BS jobs, right? 40% of the jobs we have right now could be automated and you could be gone and no one. That's the world we're moving.
We all need to work less.
We all need to work less,
all need to work
right?
less.
And I think a UBI could be a way to do that. People have talked about taxing the robots or taxing automation, which is more so than outsourcing. I mean, that's the main driver in terms of what's happening with labor. You've got all these people thinking about a post-work economy, a caring economy. I think is a really nice idea. Sharing/caring economy, where care is the #1 unit of kind of measurement for local communities.
And we're going to have to get back to that anyway as soon as as baby boomers start aging and dying, and especially in the rural areas where we have no hospitals anymore. I mean, we're going to be returning to a care-based society in a lot of these places.
That's going to do so much if we're able to make that transition when it comes to kind of patriarchy and undermining the mechanisms of patriarchy. We need to have a good inside-outside game. There are big international issues. I think that we're talking about capitalism, imperialism, colonial and post-colonial kind of formulations, war, all that is big, but then there's also these local things people can do on the ground today that provide, I think, hopefully a stark kind of contrast to that. I mean, this is a multi-generational, put it like this, modernity has been a multi-generational disaster. I don't think we're going to get over this in a generation. It's going to be a multi-generational transition into something different, better. I mean, you can't believe, I always teach my students for almost like the bad book thing, where you want to, the bad book on this is, The End of History by Francis Fukuyama, right? It's like undergrad, you just tell them this theory and they're like, of course that's stupid. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous, right? That we're stuck in this, neoliberal system of, so-called democracies with, industrial capitalism that's going to be, slightly more or less bad depending on the, society you go to, from Sweden to the U.S. or whatever. No one wants that world. They really don't. Even my conservative students at Auburn, they don't want that world, right? They know there's another world is possible. You got to imagine it. You got to try it out. You got to build it. And the stuff that works is going to get replicated, and the stuff that doesn't is going to fall by the wayside, and that's fine. But none of those experiments that people want to do, I don't see them being worse than what we have, right? I mean, be careful what you wish for, right? Fascism around the corner and all of that is still another possibility. So that doesn't mean give up the fight in terms of, national politics or pushing back against those that are in power now, but it means thinking of creative, new ways in which to undermine their power. They have this power, they have this capacity. What can you do to disrupt them? What can you do to cause crisis? What can you do to make sure that they can't do the things they want to do? Or if they do, you have these shining examples which to point to and say, look, you're doing this, but look at what we're doing here. It's kind of a prefigurative politics, right? It's what happens the day after the revolution. If we can stage some semblance of a revolution, which doesn't seem to be anywhere near on the cards. Maybe in Hong Kong, that situation is complicated. I'm still formulating an opinion there, but at least you've got a crisis there. And you've got the people saying we want something different, right? Or a good number of them. What their motivations are, left, right, I've read and heard different things. It's still unclear. There are some people that are kind of aligned with the U.S. and big business that want that. There are others, there are leftists on the ground there that are trying to steer that. So who knows where that ends up? But the question is there an infrastructure in place for something after a real revolution? Here I look at places like Syria, and I look at Rojava, and I think about the ways in which attempts are being made there to build that world in a moment of huge crisis, this moment of civil war that is allowing them to be able to build things that hopefully will survive that civil war. The problems there are abounding. They're aligned with the U.S. again. The U.S. is kind of providing funding, and so are they going to be able to properly push back against that? It's going to be tough. So I guess I still believe in experiments now. I still believe we need experiments. We need new ideas. We don't need little tweaks to the current order. We need a dramatic rethinking of our society.
So do you envision a big gathering of academics and writers, kind of a brain trust, plotting out how do we...
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
How do we move forward?
No,
Everybody's...
I believe in a lot of gatherings, and I believe in local activists, and I believe intellectuals and academics should not be designing, let's take reparations, my God. The biggest nightmare to me is going to be a group of prominent academic, intellectual, whoever's sitting in a room in federal government deciding what happens. That will be an absolute disaster. That's the way they want this to go, and it's the way it's probably going to go, and that's going to be an absolute disaster we should fight against tooth and nail, right? At the University of Chicago, what I said is Black Chicago decides what happens there. On the ground, local community organizations, a diverse array of them. This is back to Eve Ewing again, who's still in my head, right? She won't get out of my head, Eve Ewing, where she says, well, even those organizations have to be diverse, have to be inclusive. You got to make sure that, let's say, trans feminist women are not being excluded from, male-dominated, organizations, or that there's enough diversity within activist organizations to fully represent all of the interests at the very least, and have as much participation from people that are working two jobs and don't have time to fiddle with democracy, and they have needs.
Community.
A coalition kind of community, local-based thing, that the decision, what reparations should look like, has to germinate from the grassroots. It has to germinate from the ground up. It cannot be dictated from the state on top. It can't be dictated by prominent Black people who have a bunch of numbers in there. That's going to be a disaster. That will be an absolute, mark my words, it'll probably be where, if there is reparations in the near future at the state level, that will be the beginning of the fight, not the end of the fight. That is not the end of reparations. Reparations is a revolutionary praxis. It's an ongoing way of being in the world. It's a new conceptualization of justice itself. It's a new way of thinking of justice, somewhere between a punitive system, right? Because right now we have two options. You can punish people, or you can forgive. Right. Those are the only two options. You're guilty or you're not guilty. You're forgiven or you're not forgiven, right? Reparations says we actually just want justice. We want people's needs met. We want to know that there are harms that happen in the world. Those harms produce needs. Those needs require people to meet those needs. Who's going to meet the needs of those who have been harmed? That's the question of reparations, right? All of us have been harmed. All of us participate in harm, right? You want to be in a world where you are curing as much harm, addressing as much harm, healing as much harm as possible, while participating as little as possible yourself in systems of harm. That's a new method of justice. That's a new way of being in the world. That's what reparations are.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for being here, Guy Emerson Mount.
Thanks.
I'm going to have you back because there's still so much left to talk about, and we've got our own talk on reparations coming up in D.C. in the beginning of November. But this has been a pleasure. Hopefully you all have learned something at home. Hit subscribe to Merrittocracy. Thank you so much.